He'd spent millions trying to save his son. Every specialist, every treatment, every prayer. Nothing worked. His 3-year-old boy was dying and no one could tell him why. Until the day he came home and heard a sound he hadn't heard in months. His son crying. Not weak, not fading, screaming. He ran toward the sound, heart pounding, terrified of what he'd find. What he saw in that room changed everything. Benjamin Miller had everything except the one thing that mattered. His son's life. Jason had been dying for over a year, slowly, every morning weaker, every night closer to gone. It started after the accident, the one that took Catherine, his wife, in a single moment. Jason was only 2 when he lost his mother. The grief hit him like a bomb. He stopped eating, stopped smiling, started fading. Benjamin did what any father with unlimited money would do. He hired the best doctors in the world, specialists from 3 continents. Every test, every treatment, every desperate attempt to understand why his son was slipping away. The answer was always the same. Trauma, weakened immune system, we're doing everything we can. But Jason kept dying, and Benjamin kept drowning in work, 18-hour days, endless meetings, anything to avoid the truth waiting in his son's room. His mother Eleanor moved in to help. Marcus, his best friend and business partner, visited daily. Dr. Sterling made house calls twice a week, adjusting medications, running tests. Everyone was trying. So why wasn't Jason getting better? That Tuesday afternoon, Benjamin came home early. The penthouse felt wrong, too quiet, or maybe too loud. He couldn't tell. Then he heard it, crying. Not the weak sound Jason had been making for months. This was raw, desperate. A child screaming. Benjamin's heart stopped. He dropped everything and ran. When he reached Jason's room and opened the door, what he saw didn't make sense. Maria, the new maid who'd been there only 3 weeks, was on the floor holding his son. Jason was crying, thrashing in her arms, but his eyes were open, alert, alive in a way they hadn't been in over a year. Maria looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Miller," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I found something." And in that moment, everything Benjamin thought he knew about his son's illness shattered. Before we begin, hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell me where in the world you're watching from, because this story is about the moment everything changes, when someone finally sees the truth, when hope walks in through the last door you'd expect. Stay with me. Maria almost turned around 3 times before she reached the door. 6 a.m. Manhattan still waking up. The Miller building rose like a glass tower, and somewhere 30 floors up, a family she didn't know was waiting. She needed this job. Her mama's medical bills weren't going to pay themselves. But standing in that lobby, something whispered, "Turn around. This isn't for you." She got in the elevator anyway. Mrs. Chen met her in the kitchen, sharp eyes, no smile. She poured coffee and slid it across the counter. "Mr. Miller values privacy. You clean quietly. No questions. No involvement in family matters. Understood?" Maria nodded. "His son Jason is very sick. You'll clean his room last." Mrs. Chen's voice dropped. "And whatever you see in there, it's not your business." An hour later, Maria stood outside Jason's door, heart pounding. The hallway was lined with photos, Benjamin and Catherine Miller smiling at galas, on beaches, holding glasses of champagne. Catherine's smile made you believe in forever, but in the later pictures, Benjamin's eyes looked empty, like he already knew happiness doesn't last. Maria opened the door. Cold air hit her like winter. The room looked perfect. Expensive crib, toys on shelves, painted clouds on the ceiling, but it felt wrong, dead. Jason lay in the crib, barely moving. Grey skin, hollow eyes, lips almost blue. Maria's breath caught. She'd raised her cousins back home. She knew what healthy babies looked like. This wasn't sickness. This was something else. She reached down. His hand was ice cold. Her eyes went to the thermostat. 60 degrees. Someone had turned the heat off. In a baby's room. Maria's hands shook as she adjusted it to 72. Warm air hummed through the vents. She lifted Jason carefully. He was so light, it terrified her, and that's when she smelled it. Chemical, sharp, wrong. She pulled back his sleeve. Dark purple marks under his arm. Fresh, precise. Not bruises. Injection sites. Her stomach twisted. She pulled out her phone and took photos. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. On the nightstand, sat 3 prescription bottles. She photographed those too. That's when she heard footsteps. Heavy, getting closer. Maria's heart slammed. She put Jason back quickly, grabbed a dust cloth, spun toward the window. The door opened. A man in an expensive suit stepped in. 40-something. Smile that didn't touch his eyes. "You must be the new girl," he said smoothly. "Marcus Webb, Jason's godfather." He walked to the crib and looked down at Jason with eyes that made Maria's blood go cold. "How's he doing this morning?" "I don't know, sir. I was just—" "You turned up the heat." "Not a question." Maria's throat went dry. The room was cold. Marcus smiled. "Benjamin's mother has rules about that. Wouldn't want you getting in trouble your first week." He checked his watch. "Dr. Sterling comes at 10 for Jason's treatment. Be ready." He walked to the door. Stopped. "One more thing, Maria." His voice dropped. "Curiosity isn't rewarded here. It's punished." He left. Maria stood frozen, staring at the door. 10 o'clock. Dr. Sterling was coming. And Maria had just stumbled onto something that could get her killed. Maria was cleaning the living room when she heard him. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, like someone walking underwater. She looked up. A man stood in the hallway, tall, early 40s, wearing a wrinkled shirt and pants that probably cost more than her rent. His hair needed cutting. His eyes needed sleep. He stared at the wall like he'd forgotten why he'd walked into the room. Benjamin Miller. For a moment, he didn't seem to notice her. He just stood there, holding a coffee mug, staring at nothing. Then his eyes found hers. "You're new," he said. His voice was flat, empty. "Yes, sir. Maria, I started this week." He nodded slowly, like processing the information took effort. His gaze drifted toward the hallway, toward Jason's room, but he didn't move. Just stared in that direction, like there was a wall he couldn't cross. "Is he awake?" Benjamin asked quietly. I think so, sir." Benjamin's jaw tightened. He looked like he wanted to say something, do something, but he just stood there, frozen. "I should check on him," he finally said, but he didn't move. Maria watched this man, this billionaire who could buy anything, stand 3 feet from his son's door and not be able to walk through it. "Mr. Miller," she said softly. "He's okay. I made sure the room was warm." Something flickered across Benjamin's face. Pain, or maybe guilt. "Thank you," he whispered. Then he turned and walked away, back down the hall, back to wherever he'd been hiding. Maria stood there, heart aching for reasons she couldn't explain. That's when the elevator doors opened. Marcus Webb stepped out, fresh suit, perfect hair, confident smile. He carried a leather bag and moved like he owned the place. "Maria, right?" He set the bag down. "Benjamin around?" He went back to his office. Marcus's smile tightened. Of course he did. He glanced toward Jason's room. "How's the boy this morning?" "I don't know, sir." Marcus checked his watch. "Dr. Sterling should be here soon. Jason's weekly treatment. Very important. We stay on schedule." The way he said, "treatment," made Maria's skin crawl. "What kind of treatment?" she asked, before she could stop herself. Marcus's eyes sharpened. "Medical treatment. For his condition." He picked up his bag. "You're curious. I noticed that earlier. Curiosity is dangerous, Maria, especially for someone in your position." His voice was still friendly, but the threat underneath was clear. "You seem like a smart girl. Smart enough to know when to mind your business." He walked past her toward Benjamin's office, leaving Maria standing alone in the living room. Her phone felt heavy in her pocket. Those photos, those marks. The elevator dinged. An older man stepped out, 60s, gray hair, black medical bag, kind face that somehow felt wrong. "Dr. Sterling." Maria's pulse quickened. He smiled at her. "Good morning. I'm here to see Jason." "Of course." Maria's voice came out steadier than she felt. "His room is down the hall." Dr. Sterling walked past her, and Maria made a decision. She was going to find out exactly what this man was doing to that little boy, even if it killed her. Maria positioned herself in the hallway closet. Through the crack in the door, she had a clear view of Jason's room. Her heart hammered so hard she thought they'd hear it. Dr. Sterling was inside. Marcus stood beside him, and Jason, tiny, gray, barely breathing Jason lay on the changing table. "Same dosage as last week?" Dr. Sterling's voice drifted out. "Increase it slightly." Marcus's tone was casual, like ordering coffee. Benjamin starting to ask questions. "We need visible decline." Maria's blood went ice cold. Dr. Sterling hesitated. "Marcus, I don't know if you're getting paid very well to not know things." Marcus cut him off. "Do your job." Silence. Then the sound of a medical bag, unzipping. Maria pressed closer to the crack, her breath shallow. Dr. Sterling pulled out a syringe. His hands shook as he filled it with clear liquid from a small vial. He looked at Marcus. "This is the last time. After this, I'm done." Marcus smiled. Cold. Empty. "You've been saying that for 6 months. I mean it this time." "No, you don't." Marcus leaned against the wall. "You're in too deep. The money I've paid you, the malpractice suits I've covered, you walk away now, you lose everything." Dr. Sterling's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. He turned to Jason. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, his voice suddenly warm. Fake warm. "Just a little medicine. You won't even feel it." Jason's eyes opened dull, exhausted, and he made a small sound. Not quite a cry. Just resignation. Like he'd been through this too many times to fight anymore. Maria's throat tightened. Dr. Sterling lifted Jason's arm, found the spot under his armpit where the other marks were, pressed the needle into tender skin. Jason whimpered. The sound broke something inside Maria. She watched the clear liquid disappear into that tiny body, watched Dr. Sterling pull the needle out and press a cotton ball over the wound, watched Marcus check his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. "How long until we see effects?" Marcus asked. 20 minutes, maybe less. Dr. Sterling packed his bag quickly, not meeting Marcus's eyes. "He'll be noticeably weaker by this afternoon." "Good. Benjamin's been working too much to notice, but we can't take chances." Marcus walked toward the door. "Same time next week." They left. Maria stayed frozen in the closet, pulse roaring in her ears. She'd just watched them poison a child. In broad daylight, in his own home, and nobody knew. Nobody cared. Nobody was stopping them, except maybe her. She waited until their footsteps faded, then slipped out of the closet and into Jason's room. The little boy lay on the changing table, tears sliding silently down his gray cheeks. Maria picked him up carefully, holding him close. "I've got you, baby. I promise. I've got you." But even as she said it, she felt Jason's body growing weaker in her arms. 20 minutes, Dr. Sterling had said. Maria pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She had evidence now. Photos. What she'd witnessed. The medications. But who could she tell? Who would believe a maid over a doctor and a billionaire? Then she remembered. Benjamin. The broken father who couldn't even walk into his son's room. If she could make him see what was happening, really see it, maybe together they could stop this. But first, she had to keep Jason alive, until she figured out how. Maria couldn't eat. She sat in the staff break room, staring at a sandwich she'd bought that morning. Her hands still shook. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it, the needle, the clear liquid, Jason's silent tears. 20 minutes, Dr. Sterling had said. It had been 45. She'd cleaned 3 rooms since then, moving on autopilot, her mind screaming the whole time. She needed to tell someone. She needed to do something. But who? Mrs. Chen wouldn't listen. Marcus would destroy her. Dr. Sterling was part of it. That left Benjamin, the father who couldn't even look at his own son. Maria stood, her decision made. She walked down the hall toward Benjamin's office, rehearsing what she'd say. "Mr. Miller, I need to talk to you about Jason. It's urgent. Life or death." The office door was cracked open. She knocked softly. "Mr. Miller?" No answer. She pushed the door wider. Benjamin sat at his desk, surrounded by 3 computer monitors, a phone pressed to his ear. He was talking numbers, stock prices, quarterly projections, things that sounded important to everyone except the people who mattered. He glanced up, saw Maria, and held up one finger. "Wait." She waited. 5 minutes became 10. The call kept going. Benjamin's voice never changed, flat, robotic, like he was reading a script written by someone else. Finally, he hung up. "Yes?" He didn't look at her, just stared at his screen. "Mr. Miller, I need to talk to you about Jason." His fingers stopped typing, but he still didn't look up. "Is he okay?" The question hung in the air. Maria wanted to scream. "When was the last time you checked?" "I think something's wrong, something serious." Benjamin's jaw tightened. Dr. Sterling was just here. If there was something wrong, he would have told me. "But what if—" "Maria," his voice was quiet. controlled, but underneath, she heard it: exhaustion, grief, the voice of a man barely holding on. I appreciate your concern, but Jason's medical care is handled by professionals, people who went to medical school, people who know what they're doing. I understand that, but I can't do this right now. Benjamin finally looked at her, and Maria saw it clearly for the first time. He wasn't just tired, he was drowning, barely keeping his head above water. I have 3 meetings today. A board call at 2, investors flying in tomorrow. I can't. His voice cracked. I can't fall apart right now. Your son needs you. The words came out harder than Maria intended. Benjamin's face went pale, then hard. Thank you for your concern, he said coldly. You can go. Mr. Miller, I said you can go. Maria stood there, her heart breaking for this man and hating him at the same time. She turned and walked out. Behind her, she heard Benjamin's phone ring again, heard him answer it, heard his voice go robotic again, discussing things that didn't matter, while his son died 3 rooms away. Maria walked back to Jason's room. The little boy lay in his crib, breathing shallow and weak, exactly like Dr. Sterling had promised. She picked him up gently. His skin was colder than before. Your daddy can't see you right now, she whispered. But I do. I see you. Baby. Jason's fingers wrapped weakly around her thumb. Maria made a decision in that moment. If Benjamin couldn't save his son, she would. Even if it meant losing everything. Even if it meant standing alone against people with power she'd never have. She pulled out her phone and stared at the photos she'd taken. The marks, the medications, the evidence. Tomorrow, Marcus had said, investors were coming, which meant Benjamin would be distracted, which meant tomorrow Maria would dig deeper and find out exactly how deep this evil went. Maria wasn't supposed to be in Benjamin's office. Mrs. Chen had specifically said he was out for the day meetings downtown, wouldn't be back until evening. The office was off limits unless he requested cleaning. But Maria needed answers. She slipped inside quietly, closing the door behind her. The room smelled like leather and coffee. 3 monitors glowed on the desk, papers everywhere. A man drowning in work to avoid feeling anything. She started with the desk drawers, pens, business cards, nothing useful. Then she saw it. A folder on the corner of the desk, thick, official-looking. The tab read, Estate Planning, Updated. Maria's hands trembled as she opened it. Legal documents. Pages and pages of language she barely understood. She flipped through quickly, looking for anything that made sense. Then she stopped. Last Will and Testament of Benjamin Miller. Her eyes scanned down the page. In the event of my death or mental incapacity, full legal guardianship of Jason Alexander Miller, along with controlling interest in Miller Tech Industries, shall pass to Marcus James Webb until Jason reaches the age of 25. The words blurred. Maria read it again, then a 3rd time. If Benjamin died or couldn't take care of Jason, Marcus got everything. The child, the company, total control for 22 years. Her stomach turned. This wasn't just about hurting Jason. This was about taking everything. She pulled out her phone and photographed every page, hands shaking so badly she had to steady herself against the desk. That's when she heard voices in the hallway. Maria's heart stopped. She shoved the folder back where she'd found it and looked around frantically. No time to leave without being seen. She dropped to the floor and slid under the desk just as the door opened. Telling you, Benjamin, the audit can wait. Marcus's voice, smooth, confident. We've got the investor meeting tomorrow. That's what matters. The audit is scheduled in 3 months. Benjamin sounded exhausted. It's routine. I know. I'm just saying, with everything you're dealing with, Jason's health, the pressure, maybe we push it back. Give yourself breathing room. Silence. Maria held her breath under the desk, pulse hammering in her ears. Jason's getting worse, Benjamin said quietly. Doctor. Sterling says it's the trauma. That grief affects children physically. But I don't. His voice broke. I don't know how to help him. You're doing everything you can. Marcus's voice was warm, sympathetic, fake. Listen, I've been thinking. If things get too hard, if you need time away to clear your head, I'm here. I'll take care of Jason. You know that, right? I know. Good. Because you're running yourself into the ground, Ben. And Jason needs you strong. More silence. I should check on him, Benjamin said. You should rest. You've got back-to-back meetings tomorrow. I'll check on Jason. Okay. Yeah, thanks. Footsteps. The door closing. Maria waited, barely breathing. Then she heard it. Marcus's voice, low and cold. On the phone now. It's me. No, he's not suspicious yet. The audit's still 3 months out. A pause. Sterling increased the dosage today. We should see significant decline by the weekend. Another pause. I know the risks. But if we do this right, Benjamin will be too broken to function. I'll have guardianship and control before he even realizes what's happening. Silence. No, the maid's not a problem. Just some girl from Chicago. She won't cause trouble. Maria's blood ran ice cold. Marcus hung up. His footsteps moved toward the door. She stayed frozen under the desk until she heard him leave. Then she crawled out, gasping for air like she'd been underwater. She looked at her phone. The photos of the will. The evidence. Marcus was embezzling. The audit would expose him. So he was poisoning Jason to get guardianship and control of the company before Benjamin found out. And if Jason died, Benjamin would spiral completely. Marcus would have everything. Maria's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She thought about her mama's voice. When you see evil, baby, you don't run. You stand. But how do you stand against someone with unlimited money and power? How do you fight when you're just a girl nobody believes? Maria looked toward the hallway toward Jason's room. She didn't know how, yet, but she was going to stop this, even if it killed her. Maria found Jason turning blue. It was 3 a.m. She'd stayed late, couldn't leave, something in her gut screaming that tonight was different. She'd been dozing in the staff room when she heard it, a sound that wasn't quite a cry, more like a gasp. She ran. Jason's room was dark, cold again. Someone had turned the heat back down. The little boy lay in his crib, lips blue, chest barely moving. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. No, 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 no. Maria scooped him up. His body was limp, freezing. Jason, baby, stay with me. She grabbed her phone, dialed 911 with shaking fingers. 911. What's your emergency? I need an ambulance. A child, he's 3 years old. He's not breathing right. His lips are blue. What's the address? Maria gave it. The operator kept talking, asking questions, but Maria barely heard. She was holding Jason against her chest, rubbing his back, begging him to breathe. Come on, baby. Please, don't leave. Don't you leave. She heard the elevator ding. Footsteps running. Benjamin burst through the door, still in his suit from wherever he'd been. His face went white when he saw Maria holding his son. What happened? His voice cracked. He wasn't breathing right. I called 911. Benjamin took Jason from her arms. And for the first time since Maria had started working here, she saw him really look at his son. Really see him. The grey skin, the sunken eyes, the way his small body barely had weight anymore. My God. Benjamin's voice broke. What's happening to him? Maria's throat tightened. This was it, the moment. She could stay silent and keep her job, or she could tell the truth and lose everything. She thought of her mama, of Jason's weak fingers wrapped around her thumb, of the evil hiding in plain sight. Mr. Miller, she whispered, someone's been poisoning him. Benjamin's head snapped up. What? I found marks under his arms, injection sites, medications he shouldn't be taking. I've been watching, and that's insane. But his voice wavered, like part of him already knew. Dr. Sterling and Marcus. I saw them. I heard them talking about dosages, about making him weaker. Marcus. Benjamin's face went pale. No, Marcus is his godfather. He loves. He wants guardianship. Maria pulled out her phone, hands shaking. I found your will. If something happens to you, Marcus gets Jason and the company. And I heard him on the phone. He's embezzling. The audit in 3 months will expose him. So her voice broke. He's killing Jason to get control before you find out. The room went silent, except for Jason's labored breathing. Benjamin stared at her, then at his son, then at the marks on Jason's arm that he'd somehow never noticed. Show me, he whispered. Maria showed him the photos, the medications, the will, everything. Benjamin's hands started shaking. His face crumbled. I've been so blind. Tears streamed down his face. I couldn't look at him without seeing Catherine, so I just stopped looking. And while I was hiding, someone was murdering my son. Sirens wailed outside. But Benjamin didn't move. He just held Jason, finally present, finally seeing. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "Jason, I'm so sorry." The paramedics rushed in, and as they took Jason, Benjamin grabbed Maria's arm. "Help me stop them," he said. "Please, help me save my son." Maria nodded, because this wasn't just her fight anymore. The hospital waiting room smelled like antiseptic and bad coffee. Maria sat in a plastic chair, still wearing her work clothes, staring at the floor. Benjamin paced, back and forth, like if he stopped moving, he'd shatter. They'd been waiting 2 hours. Jason was somewhere behind those double doors, doctors running tests, nurses hooking him to machines, trying to figure out what was killing him. But Maria already knew, and so did Benjamin. He stopped pacing, stood in front of the window, forehead pressed against the glass. "I used to read to him every night," Benjamin said quietly. "Before Catherine died, we'd sit in that rocking chair, and I'd read until he fell asleep." His voice cracked. "After the accident, I couldn't. Every time I looked at him, I saw her. So I just stopped going in." Maria said nothing, just listened. "I told myself I was providing for him, best doctors, best care, that I was being a good father by making sure he had everything." He laughed bitterly. "But I wasn't in the room. I wasn't holding him. I wasn't seeing him." "You were grieving," Maria said softly. "I was hiding." Benjamin turned around, eyes red. "And Marcus knew it. He used my grief as a weapon. Made me think Jason's decline was normal. Made me trust him while his fists clenched. My best friend since college. The man I chose to be my son's godfather." The double doors opened. A doctor came out, young, tired, holding a tablet. "Mr. Miller?" Benjamin rushed over. Maria stood but stayed back, unsure if she belonged in this moment. "Your son is stable," the doctor said, "but we found something concerning in his blood work." "What?" "Toxic levels of immunosuppressants and anticoagulants, medications that suppress the immune system and thin the blood. No child his age should be taking these, especially not at these concentrations." Benjamin's face went white. "Someone's been giving him these intentionally?" the doctor asked carefully. "Yes." Benjamin's voice was barely a whisper. The doctor's expression hardened. "I've already contacted the police. There's a detective on her way. This is a criminal matter now, Mr. Miller." Benjamin nodded, unable to speak. "You can see him in a few minutes. We're running fluids, starting chelation therapy to remove the toxins. He's going to need time to recover, but..." The doctor's voice softened. "You got him here in time. Another day or two." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Benjamin sank into a chair, head in his hands. Maria sat beside him. "Thank you," he whispered. "If you hadn't stayed, if you hadn't noticed, if you hadn't..." He couldn't finish. "I couldn't walk away from him," Maria said simply. They sat in silence until Benjamin finally spoke again. "I have security cameras in every room. I installed them after Catherine died because I couldn't shake the feeling something was wrong." He looked at Maria. "I have footage of everything, every injection, every conversation, everything Marcus and Dr. Sterling did. Then we have proof. We have more than proof. We have enough to put them in prison for the rest of their lives." His voice turned to steel. "I'm going to destroy him. For what he did to my son, for using my grief, for..." His voice broke again. Footsteps approached. A woman in a grey suit appeared, 40s, sharp eyes, badge on her belt. "Mr. Miller, I'm Detective Sarah Walsh, Special Victims Unit." Benjamin stood. Maria stood with him. "I need to hear everything," Detective Walsh said. And as Benjamin started talking, telling her about Marcus, about Dr. Sterling, about the embezzlement and the will and the poisoning, Maria saw something change in him. The ghost was waking up. The father was coming back. An hour later, Detective Walsh closed her notebook. "We'll execute warrants tonight," she said. "Marcus Webb's home and office, Dr. Sterling's practice. With the video evidence and medical records, this case is airtight." Benjamin nodded. "Can I see my son now?" he asked quietly. The nurse appeared. "Room 304. But please, he's very weak. Don't stay long." Benjamin walked toward the room, stopped, turned to Maria. "Will you come with me?" Maria's throat tightened. "Are you sure?" "You're the only reason he's still alive." Benjamin's eyes filled. "You stayed when I couldn't. You saw him when I wouldn't. Please." They walked together down the sterile hallway, and when Benjamin opened the door to room 304, Maria saw him finally break. Jason looked so small in that hospital bed. Tubes ran from his arms. Monitors beeped softly. His skin was still grey, but his chest moved steadily now. In and out. Fighting. Benjamin stood in the doorway, frozen. Maria touched his arm gently. "He needs you." Benjamin took a shaky breath and walked to the bedside. He sat down slowly, like he was afraid he'd break something. Then he reached out and took Jason's tiny hand in his. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "It's Daddy." Jason's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first. Then they found his father's face. And something impossible happened. Jason smiled. Weak, barely there, but real. Benjamin broke. Tears poured down his face. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have been there. I should have seen. I should have—" Jason's small fingers squeezed his father's hand. The machines kept beeping. The fluorescent lights hummed. But in that moment, something sacred happened in room 304. A father found his son again. Maria stepped back toward the door, giving them space. She pulled out her phone, 17 missed calls. Mrs. Chen. 2 numbers she didn't recognize. Then a text from Detective Walsh. "Warrants executed. Both in custody. Call me." Maria's heart pounded. She stepped into the hallway and dialed. "Gibson?" Detective Walsh answered immediately. "Where are you?" "Street Luke's Hospital. With Mr. Miller and Jason." "Good. Stay there. We got them both. Tell me." Marcus Webb was arrested at his office an hour ago. Tried to run, made it to the parking garage before officers tackled him, found him trying to wipe his laptop. Walsh's voice turned cold. "Too late. We already had everything from Miller's security footage. And Dr. Sterling broke down the second we showed him the evidence. Full confession. Bank records showing Marcus paid him $500,000 over 18 months. Every injection documented. Every conversation recorded." A pause. "He's testifying against Webb in exchange for a reduced sentence." Maria closed her eyes. "It's really over. For them? Yes. Marcus Webb is looking at attempted murder, conspiracy, embezzlement, fraud. He'll die in prison. Sterling loses his license permanently. Minimum 15 years. Justice. Real justice. But it felt hollow somehow. Because Jason was still in that hospital bed, Benjamin had still lost 2 years with his son. Catherine was still gone. Evil had been stopped, but the damage was already done. "Gibson," Walsh's voice softened. "You did good. Most people would have walked away. You didn't. I couldn't. I know. That's what makes you different." Maria hung up and walked back to the room. Through the window, she saw Benjamin lying beside Jason on the hospital bed carefully, so carefully holding his son like he was made of glass. Jason was awake now, looking at his father, really looking. And Benjamin was crying, whispering things Maria couldn't hear. Probably apologies, probably promises, probably prayers. A nurse passed Maria in the hallway. "That father's barely left that room. First time I've seen him actually hold his son." "He's been lost," Maria said quietly, "but I think he's finding his way back." The nurse smiled sadly. "Some people need permission to heal. Looks like you gave him that." Maria's phone buzzed. A news alert. Billionaire's business partner arrested in shocking child poisoning case. It was already spreading. The story the world would see. Wealth, betrayal, near tragedy. But Maria knew the real story. It was about a father too broken to see, a child too weak to cry, and a woman who refused to look away when everyone told her to. Maria looked back through the window. Benjamin caught her eye and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." She nodded. But this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something else. Something harder than stopping evil. Learning to live after it. Maria stood at the window of her new office, watching the park across the street. The sign on the door behind her read, "Gibson Family Advocacy Center. When silence costs lives." Benjamin had funded it. Not out of guilt, though he carried plenty of that. But because Maria had shown him something. One person paying attention can change everything. Her phone rang. A mother from Connecticut. Her daughter's nanny noticed bruises. Nobody was listening. "Tell me everything," Maria said, grabbing her notebook. "Don't leave anything out." This was her life now. Teaching people to see what others missed, to speak when silence felt safer, to stand when standing felt impossible. 47 children so far, 47 lives saved because someone finally paid attention. Through the window, she saw them, Benjamin and Jason in the park, father and son, running through fallen leaves. Jason's laugh carried on the wind, full, bright, alive. His skin glowed pink with health, his eyes sparkled the way 4-year-old eyes should. Benjamin chased him, both of them breathless with joy. No more grey skin, no more hollow eyes, no more dying in plain sight. Just a little boy being a little boy, and a father finally present enough to see it. They spotted Maria in the window. Jason waved frantically, jumping up and down. Benjamin lifted him onto his shoulders, and they walked toward the building. 5 minutes later, they burst through her office door. "Maria!" Jason launched himself at her. She caught him, laughing, holding him tight. "Hey, baby, you get taller every time I see you. Daddy says I'm gonna be bigger than him." Benjamin smiled a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes now. "We brought lunch. Thought you might be hungry." They sat on the floor of her office like they did most Tuesdays. Sandwiches from the deli, apple juice for Jason, coffee for the adults. "How's the new case?" Benjamin asked quietly, watching his son color at Maria's desk. "Scary, but we'll get her out." Benjamin nodded. He understood now. Understood that evil didn't just live in penthouses, that children everywhere needed someone to notice, to care, to fight. "We got the sentencing today," he said. "Marcus got life without parole, additional charges for Catherine's death." Maria had known it was coming, but hearing it still felt like something settling into place. Justice, imperfect, but real. "How do you feel?" she asked. Benjamin watched his son. "I spent a year hating him, hating myself, drowning in what I missed, what I lost." He paused. "But Jason's therapist said something last week. She said grief is just love with nowhere to go, and I'd been directing mine at work, at anger, at everything except the person who needed it most." Jason looked up from his coloring. "Daddy doesn't work all the time anymore." "No," Benjamin said softly. "I don't." He'd stepped back from Miller Tech, hired new leadership, still involved but no longer consumed, because he'd learned something most people never do. You can build empires and still lose everything that matters. Jason tugged Maria's sleeve. "I made you something." He handed her a drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands. One tall, one small. "That's you and me," he explained. "The day you saved me." Maria's throat tightened. She looked at this little boy, alive, thriving, whole, and felt something break open in her chest. "You know what I think?" she said, pulling him close. "I think maybe we saved each other." Benjamin's eyes filled. "You gave me my son back. You gave me my life back. You were always his father," Maria said gently. "You just needed someone to remind you." They sat in comfortable silence. Jason colored. Benjamin sipped coffee. Maria answered emails from families in crisis. Outside, the sun broke through clouds. And Maria thought about her mama's voice from all those years ago. "Sometimes, baby, God puts you exactly where you need to be, even when it costs you everything, because somebody needs you to be brave." She'd been terrified that first morning in the Miller penthouse. A girl from Chicago's South Side, with nothing but instinct and courage. She'd risked everything, her job, her safety, her life for a child who wasn't hers. And in the process, she'd learned something she'd carry forever. Love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, refusing to look away when everyone else does. Sometimes it's just staying, seeing, caring when caring costs you everything. Jason looked up from his drawing. "Maria, can you come to my birthday party?" "Wouldn't miss it, baby." Benjamin caught her eye and smiled, grateful, humbled, forever changed. Because some people come into your life for a reason. Some save you, and some teach you that the bravest thing you can do is fight for someone else's child when the whole world tells you it's not your place. Maria looked at the phone on her desk. It would ring again tomorrow. Another family, another crisis, another child who needed someone to see them, and she'd answer. Because she'd learned something in that cold penthouse room. Every child deserves someone who refuses to walk away. Every child deserves someone brave enough to stand, even when standing costs everything. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment and let us know. And if this story touched something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, The bravest thing we can do is simply care. Subscribe for more stories that remind you you're not alone. Hope is real, and love always finds a way. Dominic Patterson's heart skipped when he arrived home unexpectedly early that Thursday. He never planned to witness what he saw in the backyard, but once he did, there was no turning back. The storm had ended just moments before. The sky still trembled with grey, and the patio stones gleamed wet under a quiet sun. Dominic hadn't meant to come home early. The meeting downtown had been cancelled at the last minute, and instead of heading back to the office, he'd told his driver to take him home. It wasn't like him. He rarely broke routine. But something about that afternoon, maybe the weight of silence in the car, maybe the memory of a dream he couldn't shake, pushed him to go back. And now, standing just inside the glass doors of his house, his breath caught in his throat. He heard it before he saw it. Laughter. Genuine, unfiltered, and wild. It was coming from outside. At first, Dominic thought it must have been the neighbors' kids, but then, as he stepped forward, he saw them, and his world cracked open. His 7-year-old son, Ryan, was outside in the backyard, walking, with forearm crutches, yes, and slowly. But walking. He was barefoot, stepping with careful focus into a puddle that shimmered beneath him. His t-shirt clung to him from sweat or rain, Dominic didn't know which. And in front of him, kneeling on the damp grass with a towel, was Nora King, the maid. She had been hired 3 weeks ago to clean floors and prepare guest rooms. That was it. Nothing more. But here she was, barefoot too, guiding Ryan's steps like a coach guiding a dancer, her hands steady, her voice soft and firm. "One more, yes, just like that," she whispered. "Proud chest, strong legs. You're doing it, baby, you're doing it." Ryan grinned, wide and unguarded. It was a look Dominic hadn't seen in years. Something warm and foreign tugged in his chest. What the hell was happening? Was this dangerous? Was she qualified? Why hadn't she asked permission? His mind raced with questions, none of them with answers. He didn't move. Couldn't. He stood like stone, staring through the glass. A part of him burned with fury. Another part, deep and unspoken, felt something much harder to name. Guilt. Maybe awe. The sky crackled softly overhead, and a breeze moved across the garden like a sigh. Nora didn't see him. She was focused entirely on Ryan, adjusting his stance with the towel beneath his foot, helping him balance in the slickness. She wasn't smiling in a performative way. She wasn't pretending. She was right there with him. Every shaky step. Dominic's fists clenched and unclenched by his sides. His jaw tightened. What gave her the right? And yet, what had given him the right to stop trying? For months, Ryan had barely spoken. He'd withdrawn after the accident, after Marissa died, after the funeral and the therapy, and the endless carousel of hired caretakers who came and went, each one more impersonal than the last. Dominic had poured millions into treatments, none of which had touched Ryan's spirit, and now here in the backyard, Ryan was walking, laughing, trusting, because of her. The maid. Dominic stepped back slowly, afraid to disrupt the moment. His hands trembled as they reached for the door handle. He didn't open it. He just watched. Before we continue, click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. I hope this story makes you believe that nothing is impossible if only you believe. Later that evening, Dominic barely touched his dinner. He sat at the head of the long dining table, his tie loosened, a fork resting uselessly in his hand. Ryan had already gone to bed, exhausted but smiling, and Nora had quietly returned to the guest room hallway without a word. The image wouldn't leave him, her kneeling, his son laughing. And that sound, that wild belly-deep sound, it echoed in his head like music he hadn't known he missed. He rose from the table and poured himself a drink, something strong, and stood by the window looking out at the garden. The puddle was still there, reflecting the soft porch lights like glass. 9 caretakers in 6 weeks. None had gotten close to Ryan. Most had given up within days. One had claimed Ryan was emotionally unreachable, but Nora hadn't asked permission, hadn't waited for instruction. She'd just acted on instinct or impulse or something else entirely. He'd seen it on her face. She believed in Ryan, and Ryan believed in her. That thought hit him harder than expected, and deeper. Dominic set the glass down harder than he meant to. Liquid sloshed onto the counter. He had questions, and tomorrow morning he was going to get answers. Dominic set the glass down harder than he meant to. Liquid sloshed onto the counter. He had questions, and tomorrow morning he was going to get answers. But the morning didn't make things clearer. It made everything worse. His usual routine, espresso, emails, morning brief, unraveled before the first hour passed. The numbers on his screen blurred. His assistant's voice became background static. No matter how hard he tried to focus, his mind dragged him back to that soaked backyard and the sight of Ryan stepping barefoot into a puddle with Nora at his side. That laughter, that look in his son's eyes. He left the office by noon. Didn't tell anyone why. Didn't need to. Back at the house, the silence felt louder than usual. He moved through the halls like he didn't belong there, like he was intruding in his own home. Then he heard movement in the kitchen. Nora's voice, low, humming something familiar, something warm. He found her by the stove, chopping parsley on the cutting board. The smell of garlic and lemon drifted in the air. She was barefoot again. Dominic stood in the doorway, watching her. She turned slowly when she sensed him. "Mr. Patterson," she said calmly, hands still mid-motion. "I didn't expect you home so early." He didn't respond right away. He stepped into the room and folded his arms. "We need to talk." Nora met his gaze without flinching. Her expression didn't shift. No panic, no guilt, just quiet readiness. "I saw you yesterday," he said, "in the backyard, with Ryan." A pause, then a small nod. "I figured you had." "What were you doing?" His voice was tight. "Who told you to work with him like that?" "No one," she said. "I didn't ask permission." "That much is obvious." "I didn't think I needed it. To help a child who wanted help." Dominic felt heat rise in his chest. "He's my son." Nora set the knife down gently. "Yes, and he trusts me." That cut deeper than he expected. He stepped forward, trying to keep control of his voice. "You're not licensed. You could have hurt him." She tilted her head slightly. "Actually, I am licensed. Masters in Pediatric Physical Therapy. Howard University, class of 2015, licensed in 3 states. He blinked. The air shifted. "That's not what's on your resume." "No," she said, "because no one ever calls back when it is." Dominic stared at her. She walked over to the sink and rinsed her hands, speaking as she moved. "I've applied to every children's hospital in Chicago, every private therapy clinic, every charter school. The interviews are polite, sometimes even enthusiastic, but they don't hire me, not with my last name, not with my zip code." She turned off the tap and dried her hands. "Eventually, I stopped waiting to be chosen. I took whatever work I could find. This house was one of the listings. Cleaning floors paid the bills." Dominic let out a slow breath, steadying his thoughts. "So you just decided to become my son's therapist?" Nora met his eyes. "No. I decided to see him." Silence. She stepped forward, folding the towel in her hands. He wouldn't talk, wouldn't make eye contact. He flinched when I got too close. But one morning I found his sketchbook left open on the patio table. Cars, wheels, movement. I complimented the drawings. He didn't answer, but the next day he left another one for me to find. Her voice was softer now. "That's how it started. Quiet things, eye contact, head nods. I never pushed him, never touched him, unless he asked. I earned it, slowly, and when I saw him trying to walk on his own, I offered to help." She set the folded towel down. "I used to run a clinic in D.C., small, community-based. It got defunded. After that, I lost my mum, lost custody of my little brother, came here for a new start. I didn't come to play savior. I came to survive." Dominic couldn't move. He had walked into this kitchen ready to fire her, to put up walls. to re-establish control, but all he felt now was small and humbled. Still, something in him resisted. "You still should have told me," he said. "I'm his father." Nora nodded once. "I know, and I thought about it, but I didn't think you'd listen." He opened his mouth to protest, but nothing came out. "I saw the cameras," she added. "I know you watch." A pause. "I figured if I was wrong you'd stop it, but you didn't." She walked past him slowly, then stopped just behind him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes children don't need the most qualified. They need the most present." Dominic turned slowly. She didn't look away. He felt the weight of her words pressing into all the empty spaces he'd been trying to ignore for years. The grief, the shame, the absence he'd filled with work and logic and long silences. "I don't know whether to fire you or thank you," he said honestly. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. "You don't have to decide right now." She walked back to the counter, picking up the parsley again. Dominic stood there a moment longer. Then he left the kitchen without another word. But as he passed the hallway where Ryan's sketchbook lay open on the console table, he stopped. On the page, a boy in a puddle, a woman beside him, both smiling, and Dominic, watching from the window, drawn in careful pencil strokes, with the caption scrawled in a child's unsteady hand. "Miss Nora says I can fly." The next morning, Dominic didn't say anything. Not to Nora, not to Ryan. He just sat with his coffee a little longer, letting the hum of the house settle around him. Nora moved quietly in the background, preparing breakfast, humming to herself, asking Ryan what he wanted in his lunchbox. Dominic watched them both from behind his newspaper, but it wasn't detachment anymore. It was curiosity. Later that day, after Nora and Ryan left for the park, Dominic retreated to his office and pulled up the home security footage. The cameras had been installed after a break-in scare last winter, hidden well, looping silently into the cloud. He'd never had much reason to check them, until now. He scrolled back through the previous week. Morning routines started slowly, Nora arriving almost a full hour before her shift, letting herself in without a sound, setting her bag down, stretching her back like she'd done it 1,000 times. And then, soft knocks on Ryan's door. No words, just presence. The footage from 4 mornings ago showed her kneeling beside him on the carpet, helping him balance on one leg using a rolled-up sock. They were both in pajamas, his oversized, hers mismatched from sleep. Another day, she transformed the hallway runner into a path of balance challenges. Crumpled towels, couch cushions, even a pair of worn oven mitts, laid out like stepping stones. Ryan grinned through every wobble. When he fell, she applauded. When he succeeded, she didn't cheer. She nodded as if she always knew he would. It was makeshift therapy without the machines or white coats. And it was working. Dominic leaned closer to the screen. In the evening footage, Nora stayed after hours, sitting beside Ryan at the dining table as he sketched. He wasn't just doodling cars anymore. He was drawing movement, limbs in motion, figures jumping, walking, dancing. She'd ask questions. "What's the story here? Why is this one smiling?" And Ryan would answer, in whispers at first, then full sentences. Dominic hadn't heard him speak that much in months. He sat back in his chair, the weight of it all pressing deeper. This woman, this stranger, was unlocking something no therapist, no specialist, no school had managed to touch. And she was doing it with towels, drawings, and a patience that didn't ask for praise. The next day, Dominic didn't watch the footage. He watched in person. It was Saturday. He pretended to take a call by the patio doors, leaving them cracked just enough to hear. Nora and Ryan were in the backyard again. Today, she was using spoons, lining them in a zigzag across the grass. Ryan stepped over them one by one, arms out for balance. When he missed a step and kicked one, he laughed instead of freezing. "You're not breaking anything," she said. "You're learning." Dominic smiled without meaning to. He didn't remember the last time he'd seen his son laugh like that. Maybe before the accident, before the silence. He stepped closer, still unnoticed. Then he heard something that stopped him cold. Ryan said clearly, "Miss Nora, do you think I could climb stairs one day?" Nora didn't hesitate. "I think you'll do more than that." Later that night, Dominic couldn't sleep. The house was quiet. Ryan had fallen asleep beside a sketchbook filled with more of those fluid, fearless drawings. Dominic sat alone in the living room, watching the flames curl inside the gas fireplace, thinking about all the things he hadn't seen. Not because they weren't happening, but because he hadn't known where to look. Nora had been here for weeks. She didn't advertise, didn't demand. She just showed up. Again and again. Sunday morning, Dominic made a decision. He woke up early and wandered into the backyard, while Nora and Ryan were setting up another obstacle course with empty milk cartons and strips of painter's tape. Nora looked up, startled. He held up a hand. "Don't stop. I just want to watch." Ryan looked uncertain at first, but then grinned. Nora nodded once, then turned back to Ryan. "All right, showtime." Dominic sat on the edge of the steps, quiet, letting the moment breathe. Ryan moved through the course slowly but confidently. When he struggled, Nora coached. When he hesitated, she modeled. There was no pressure, no timeline, just effort, just trust. And beneath it all, Dominic began to see it, the quiet brilliance in her approach, the science beneath the simplicity, the strategy behind the improvisation. This wasn't chance, it was art. Over the next few days, Dominic found himself lingering longer, not out of obligation, but out of something else, guilt, maybe hope. He watched Nora adapt each day to Ryan's mood, his energy, his body. She never repeated an exercise exactly. She challenged him when he needed pushing, and softened when he showed signs of fatigue. And Ryan responded to her like gravity. He was laughing more, talking more, drawing with color. He even joked at dinner. "Dad," he said one night, "Miss Nora says my legs are made of springs. What do you think?" Dominic nearly choked on his water. He looked at his son, so alive, so curious, and then at Nora, who was quietly gathering dishes without looking up. "I think Miss Nora's right," Dominic said. Ryan grinned, and Dominic felt something click loose in his chest. Maybe he'd been blind. Maybe he'd been scared. But he wasn't anymore. He was watching. And for the first time in a long time, he was learning. The sun was low, casting a soft gold over the lawn as Ryan stepped out barefoot onto the grass. Nora followed behind him, carrying 2 rolled-up towels and a pair of plastic cones. She placed them in the yard. Nothing fancy, nothing clinical, just enough to mark a small path. Dominic watched from the patio, silent. He hadn't said much all morning. Something about today felt different. Ryan was unusually focused, and Nora hadn't said a word of encouragement yet. She just gave him space, trusted him to begin, and Ryan did. He picked up one crutch, then the other, and placed them aside carefully, deliberately, like he knew what came next would be different. Then he looked ahead at the line of cones, and stepped. It was small, barely a shift forward, but his foot landed, then the other. He wobbled, arms outstretched, but didn't fall. Another step, unsteady, then another. 3 steps, 4, then 5. Dominic stood, heart slamming in his chest. "Miss Nora!" Ryan shouted mid-stride, eyes wide. "Did you see that?" She turned in time to see his 6th step and caught him gently when he swayed. "I saw it, baby," she whispered, crouching beside him. "I saw every second." Ryan beamed. Dominic didn't know he'd moved, but he was halfway across the yard now. He knelt down slowly beside them, his hands trembling. I don't know what to say," he breathed, eyes locked on his son's flushed face. "Ryan, that was—" "Walking," Ryan said softly, still catching his breath. "I walked." Nora gave him a towel to wipe his forehead and turned to Dominic. "He's been ready," she said gently. "His body, his balance. It was there. He just needed someone to believe it was possible." Dominic swallowed hard. Emotion caught in his throat like a knot, All those years of specialists, all those late-night sessions with surgeons and neurologists, their voices thick with restraint, all those charts that said unlikely, limited, delayed. But none of them had seen this, not like Nora had. He looked at her, really looked, and then whispered, "Thank you." She nodded, eyes soft. "He did the work." "You showed him how?" "No," she said. "I just reminded him he could." Dominic let the moment sit in the quiet. The garden held its breath. Somewhere a bird chirped. Ryan leaned back against Nora's knee, tired but glowing. Dominic sat beside them, knees in the grass, hands on his lap like a child who didn't know what to do next. "I've been so afraid," he admitted. Afraid of pushing too hard. Afraid of hoping. Nora didn't answer. She just listened. "And I think I stopped seeing him for who he is. I only saw what he lost." "That's grief," she said softly. "It doesn't always look like crying. Sometimes it looks like distance." Dominic nodded slowly. "You don't have to apologize," she added. "I do." "For what?" He looked down at his hands. "For disappearing." That night, the house felt not louder, not busier, but fuller. Dominic sat at the kitchen island while Ryan told him every detail of his backyard walk, sketchbook open between them, Nora quietly making dinner a few feet away. "She says puddles make you stronger," Ryan said, giggling. Dominic smiled. "Is that so? Because you gotta balance and not slip." "Makes sense." "She said next week I might climb the porch steps. I'm gonna do it, Dad, I swear." Dominic reached over and tousled his son's hair. "I believe you." Ryan's eyes sparkled. That was all he'd wanted to hear. Later, after Ryan had gone to bed and the house was quiet again, Dominic stood at the glass doors, looking out at the cones in the grass. The towel was still crumpled beside them. He heard Nora step into the room behind him. "Do you want me to clean that up before I leave?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "Leave it. I like seeing it there." She hesitated. "You sure?" "Yeah." He turned to her. "I meant what I said earlier. Thank you." She nodded, the silence between them calm now. "I've been thinking," Dominic added, "about what you said yesterday, about presence, about belief." He exhaled slowly. "I think I've been arrogant, thinking the best doctors and top-dollar clinics could solve things, but I never asked what he needed. Not really." Nora said nothing at first. Then, "Sometimes what kids need is someone who kneels down and sees the world from their height." He nodded. "It's humbling." "It's supposed to be." Dominic gave a soft laugh. Nora stepped toward the doorway, gathering her things, but before she left, she turned back. "He's proud of you, you know," she said. Dominic blinked. "Ryan?" She nodded. "Even when you couldn't look him in the eyes, he still looked up to you." That hit somewhere deep. Nora gave a small smile, then disappeared down the hall. Dominic turned back to the glass, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was looking at what he'd lost. He was finally seeing what he still had. The next morning, the sky was soft and grey, and the house held a rare kind of quiet, the kind that comes not from silence but from stillness, peace. Dominic waited until Nora had finished tidying the breakfast dishes before speaking. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice lower than usual, not business low, personal low. Nora turned from the sink, drying her hands on a towel. "Of course." "In the garden?" She nodded. They stepped outside into the soft light, the dew still clinging to the grass, and sat, Dominic on the edge of a bench, Nora on the low step beside the planters Ryan had once abandoned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Dominic broke the silence. "I've seen what you've done for him, not just physically, but whatever that thing is that makes him light up. And I need to know, how did you learn this? Not just the techniques, the patience, the knowing." Nora sat back slightly. "You want the real story?" "I want all of it." She looked down at her hands for a moment, then folded them in her lap. "Isaiah," she said softly. "My younger brother." Dominic listened. He was born early, cord-wrapped, spent his first 6 weeks in NICU. When he finally came home, the doctors said he might never walk. CP, similar to Ryan. He was 2 when our mom passed. A stroke, sudden. I was 17, still in high school. Dominic's breath caught, but he didn't interrupt. "They wanted to put him in the system," she continued. "Said I was too young to take care of him. But I fought for guardianship, got it, barely. And then I taught myself what I needed to know." "How?" Dominic asked quietly. "Libraries, YouTube, old physical therapy textbooks from thrift stores. I watched how therapists moved, took notes, asked questions. I couldn't afford a degree yet, so I made one up from scratch." She gave a half smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. By the time Isaiah was 5, he was taking his first steps, against every prediction. I used kitchen towels, couch cushions, milk jugs, brooms, anything I could find. I made therapy out of survival. Dominic was silent, not from judgment, but awe. I worked nights at a diner, took classes during the day. Howard University let me in on a scholarship. I graduated top 5%, got licensed, applied everywhere. "And?" Nora shook her head slowly. "You know what happens when you show up to a downtown clinic with a Southside zip code on your resume, and braids you did yourself because you can't afford a salon?" She met his eyes. They smile. They nod. Then they move on. Dominic looked down, ashamed of how familiar that sounded, how easy it was to believe potential only when it wore the right kind of polish. "I kept going," she said. "Opened a community clinic in DC, small but busy. We saw dozens of kids. Some walked for the first time. Some just learned to trust someone, but then funding dried up. Politics, grants pulled. The clinic closed. I lost my job, and eventually custody of Isaiah." Her voice caught for the first time. "I wasn't stable enough," they said. "He got placed with an aunt in Texas, still doing well, but I haven't seen him in 2 years." Dominic let the silence linger, let it mean something. "You shouldn't have had to do any of that alone," he said finally. Nora shrugged. "That's how it is for people like me. You learn early. There's the world you're born into, and then there's the one you have to carve yourself." He studied her for a long moment. The girl with the rolled-up towels and the open hands had once built miracles in the corner of a cramped apartment, while the rest of the world told her no. And now she was doing it again, here, in his backyard, with his son. That evening, Dominic did something he hadn't done in years. He cooked, or tried to. Nora found him in the kitchen around 6:30, sleeves rolled up, a mess of pasta water and confusion surrounding him. "Do you even know what you're doing?" she asked, half laughing. "No," he said, grinning. "But I figured I owed you a meal, at least one." She paused. "Is this dinner?" "Yes," he said. "Sit, please. Ryan's helping with garlic bread, which means we're in real trouble." She hesitated, then slowly pulled out a chair. Ryan bounded in a few minutes later, apron askew and face streaked with flour. "I told Dad he was going to burn the noodles," he announced. Dominic feigned offense. "They're al dente. They're crunchy," Ryan shot back. Nora laughed, the sound light and rare. They sat together at the table, Dominic, Ryan and Nora, for the first time, not as employer and employee, not as therapist and patient, but something messier, something warmer. Something like family. They talked about school, about favorite movies, about how Ryan wanted to build a robot that could fetch snacks. At one point, Ryan turned to Dominic and said, "Miss Nora told me once that therapy means healing the whole person, not just the legs." Dominic nodded, eyes meeting Nora's. "She's right." Ryan beamed. After dinner, as they cleared the plates, Nora lingered at the sink while Dominic dried. "I didn't expect any of this," she said softly. "Not the job, not the boy, definitely not the pasta." He smiled. "Me neither." "You don't have to keep me here, you know," she added. You've seen what I do. You could hire someone more official, flashier credentials. Dominic set the dish towel down. I don't want official. I want you. She turned, surprised. You saw my son when I couldn't. You reminded him what strength feels like. And you reminded me what it looks like to care again. Her eyes softened, but she didn't speak. He stepped closer. I don't know what's next, he said. But I know I don't want to go back to what life was before you walked into it. Then, after a moment, she whispered, Me either. And for the first time it felt like the walls between them were no longer made of roles or fear or grief, just shared ground, hard-earned, sacred, real. The next morning, Dominic stood by the doorway of the kitchen, watching Nora cut fruit for Ryan's lunch. Her movements were steady, almost meditative, knife gliding, pieces folded neatly into a small container. She didn't notice him at first. Nora, he said softly. She looked up. Morning. He stepped into the room, still unsure of how to phrase what had been pressing on his mind since dinner the night before. I want to offer you a permanent position, he said, her brow furrowed. I thought I already had one. Not as the maid, he said, as Ryan's therapist. Officially, full-time, with full pay, benefits, everything you'd get at any top clinic. Nora blinked. Dominic continued, This isn't charity, it's recognition of your skill, your impact, and of what I see when I look at my son now. She set the knife down, slowly. I don't know, she said cautiously. People already look at me sideways, being in a white man's house, raising his child. You're not raising my child, Dominic said gently. You're helping him heal. She hesitated, folding her arms. I just don't want anyone thinking this is some pity project, she added, or that I'm being kept here like something that doesn't belong outside these walls. You belong exactly where you choose to be, he said, and if that's here, then I'll make sure the world knows what you are, not just a therapist, but one of the best. Nora held his gaze for a long time. Finally she nodded. Okay, but I want a space. A real one. No more puddles and towels. Dominic smiled. Done. Within 2 weeks, the spare guest room overlooking the garden was transformed. Where once there had been beige carpet and dusty lamps, there were now textured mats, resistance bands, a sensory swing, foam blocks, art supplies, light-up balance beams, shelves lined with colourful containers. Nora called it Ryan's room of yes. No walls, she said, no charts, no pity. Just space to say yes to his body, his story, his pace. Ryan was thrilled. The first time he stepped inside, his eyes went wide. This looks like a superhero lab, he whispered. It is, Nora replied, and you're the test pilot. What followed were weeks of transformation, subtle at first, then seismic. Nora introduced sensory play with textured fabrics and weighted blankets. She crafted games that disguised motor skill drills as treasure hunts. She taught Ryan to name how his body felt, not just physically, but emotionally. One day, she placed a mirror in front of him and said, Tell me one strong thing you see. My legs, he said without hesitation. Dominic began spending more time in the sessions, quietly at first, just sitting on the floor beside them, listening. Sometimes he'd join the games, chasing foam balls or holding Ryan steady on the wobble board. And slowly, Ryan began to talk, not just to Nora, to Dominic, about things that had once been locked behind silence, his fears, the accident, even his memories of his mother. She used to braid my hair, he said one afternoon, tracing a line on a sketch of her face. She called me her little lion. Dominic swallowed the lump in his throat. She did. That night, Dominic found a note on his desk in Ryan's handwriting. Thanks for listening, Dad. It felt good. School had always been a sore subject. Crowds, stares, eyes that stared too long. But one evening over dinner, Ryan surprised them both. Miss Nora says I don't have to go back if I'm not ready, but I think I want to try, he said. Dominic looked up from his plate. You sure? Ryan nodded. Only half days. But yeah. We'll make it work, Dominic said. Nora smiled softly. He's braver than he knows. That weekend, Dominic watched as Nora led Ryan through a confidence coaching exercise. She placed a line of tape down the hallway and asked him to cross it while saying something bold. Ryan hesitated, then whispered, "I'm stronger than people think." "Louder," Nora said. He said it again, clearer, and again, stronger. Dominic caught the moment on video. He didn't post it, didn't share it. He just watched it once more that night after Ryan had gone to sleep, tears streaking down his face in the glow of his phone screen. That same evening, after the lights were off and the house had settled into sleep, Dominic tucked Ryan in and reached to turn off the lamp. But Ryan grabbed his hand gently. "Dad," he whispered. "Yeah?" Ryan looked up at him, eyes soft. "I'm not scared anymore." Dominic froze. He didn't know what to say, so he just leaned forward and kissed his son's forehead. "Me neither," he said quietly. Then he turned off the light, closed the door and stood in the hallway a long while, listening to the sound of his son breathing steady and free in the dark. The expo was held in a sleek glass building near the lakefront. Booths stretched from wall to wall, robotic braces, digital exosuits, state-of-the-art treadmills that monitored every micro-movement. Screens flashed, logos gleamed. Experts in tailored suits stood beside their innovations, ready to sell progress by the square foot. Nora shifted in her seat at the panel table, adjusting the lanyard around her neck. It read, "Guest Demonstrator, Pediatric Movement Therapy." She looked down at her palms. They were dry but tense. She wasn't used to being on this side of the display, on a stage, not in a supply closet. Ryan sat beside her, legs swinging from his chair, crayon in hand, quietly sketching the scene. Dominic stood a few feet behind, arms crossed, watching the crowd gather. "You okay?" he asked softly. Nora gave a tight smile. "I feel like someone's going to ask me what algorithm I used for sidewalk therapy with kitchen towels." Dominic chuckled. "Let them ask." The session began. Other speakers showed clips of cutting-edge interventions, 3D gait mapping, AI-assisted joint tracking. Then it was Nora's turn. She didn't have a slideshow. She had a video. Ryan, barefoot in the backyard, stepping into puddles, balancing on pillows, laughing, walking, and in the background, her voice steady and warm. The room went quiet. When the clip ended, Nora stood. She didn't speak like the others, with polished jargon or sleek delivery. She spoke from the gut. "I didn't have funding," she said. "I had a boy who wanted to move again. I had towels. I had belief. So I used them." There was silence. Then slow, growing applause. A woman in the front row, a pediatric neurologist, raised her hand. "What you've done is extraordinary," she said. "Do you publish anywhere?" Nora shook her head. "No time. I work." Someone else stood. "Do you train?" "No, but I could." Dominic stepped forward then, taking the mic from the moderator. "If anyone wants to know why my son can walk again, why he can laugh and climb stairs and sleep through the night without nightmares, it's because of her," he said, turning to Nora. "Not tech, not labs, her, Nora King." The applause swelled. Cameras flashed. A few reporters edged closer, scribbling notes. Nora stood still, stunned. She wasn't used to spotlights, but she didn't flinch. She just nodded. Once. Afterward, the three of them slipped away early. The attention was kind, but loud. Nora needed quiet. Ryan needed space. So Dominic drove them south, away from glass towers and clinics, into the neighborhood where Nora had first learned how to heal without a license, a grant, or permission. The streets were familiar to her, in a way no GPS could explain. The sidewalks knew her feet. The corners held stories. They parked in front of a modest brick community center. The sign outside was crooked, but the paint was fresh. Inside, a group of teens were gathered in the gym, playing modified basketball. One of them had a prosthetic leg. Another moved with crutches, but fast and confident. At the edge of the court, a tall young man called out drills. "Left foot, cross, shoot." He turned and saw Nora. "Sis!" Isaiah. He ran over, and lifted her in a hug that almost knocked her backward. Nora laughed fully for the first time all week. Dominic watched them, something warm spreading in his chest. "You didn't say he was taller than you now," Dominic joked. "He cheats," Nora said, eyes still on her brother. Isaiah turned to Ryan. "So this is the legend," he said. "My sister's newest miracle." Ryan grinned, stepping forward. "I'm learning stairs." Isaiah held out a fist. "Respect." They bumped knuckles like old friends. Later, they sat on a folding bench outside the gym, watching the teens pack up equipment. "I started helping out here a few months ago," Isaiah said. "They needed someone who knew how to get kids moving without making them feel broken." Dominic looked around. "You built something." Isaiah shrugged. "I'm just continuing what she started." He nodded toward Nora. "She used to make me walk between cereal boxes in the kitchen, told me they were mountains." Dominic smiled. "She made me believe I wasn't less, just different." Nora swallowed, blinking fast. The sun was starting to set, casting soft orange across the blacktop. Dominic looked at her then, really looked, and saw it all laid out in the open. The weight she'd carried, the lives she'd touched, the quiet, relentless force that had lived beneath the surface of every room she'd ever entered. She wasn't just transforming Ryan. She'd been transforming entire corners of the world, quietly, unseen, until now. On the drive home, Ryan dozed in the back seat, a hoodie tucked under his head. The city lights flickered as they merged onto the expressway. Nora stared out the passenger window, arms folded. "You were brilliant today," Dominic said. She gave a tired smile. "Still don't know if the world's ready for someone like me." Dominic's voice was firm, but soft. "Then we make space." She looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road. "Whatever door you want to walk through next, we'll build it together." Outside, the skyline rose like a promise, and inside the car, something settled. Not just hope, but purpose. The auditorium hummed with chatter and restless energy. Rows of folding chairs filled the space, parents fanning themselves with programs, phones ready to capture every shaky performance. It was the annual elementary talent show, paper stars taped across the stage, the words "Shine Bright" painted in bold, cheerful letters. Dominic sat in the third row, his heart thudding in time with the faint thump of his pulse in his ears. His hands wouldn't stay still. Every few seconds, he checked the stage lights, the aisle, the edge of the curtain. He wasn't nervous for the other kids. Ryan. Backstage, Nora crouched beside him, her hand steady on his shoulder. Ryan was dressed in a light blue shirt and khaki pants, simple, but his favorite. His crutches were folded and leaning against the wall. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready," she said softly. "You've already proved everything you need to." Ryan looked up at her, calm in a way that was older than his years. "I want to." "Why?" "Because I want everyone to know I'm not scared anymore." Nora smiled, her eyes glistening. "Then you go tell them." He nodded once, determined. The MC called his name. "Next up, Ryan Patterson, 2nd grade." The applause was polite at first, standard parent applause. But as Ryan appeared from behind the curtain, alone, no crutches, walking slowly but deliberately toward the microphone, the sound swelled. The room went silent. You could hear each careful step, each breath. Dominic's throat closed. Ryan stopped center stage, his small hands gripping the edge of the podium for balance. He looked out over the sea of faces. His voice, when it came, was quiet but steady. "My name is Ryan Patterson," he began, "and today I want to talk about my hero." A ripple of curiosity ran through the crowd. "My hero doesn't wear a cape," Ryan continued. "She wears sneakers. She used to mop floors, and she taught me how to stand again." He looked toward the audience, and his eyes found Nora. "She taught me how to fall and laugh, how to walk through puddles without being scared, how to believe that my body isn't broken. It's just learning." A soft gasp escaped from someone in the back row. The teacher beside the stage pressed a hand to her heart. Ryan took a deep breath, his voice growing stronger. "My hero's name is Miss Nora King, And she didn't just teach me how to walk. She taught me how to be brave." Applause broke out, first scattered, then roaring. Nora covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. Dominic stood, clapping hard, not caring who saw the tears on his own face. Around him, the entire room was on its feet. Teachers, students, parents, all standing for a 7-year-old boy who had just walked into the world on his own 2 feet. After the show, the hallway filled with noise and movement, children laughing, parents congratulating, cameras flashing. Ryan ran to Nora and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You did it," she whispered, crouching to his level. He grinned. "We did it." Dominic approached, his expression caught between pride and disbelief. "You were incredible, bud." Ryan's face lit up. "Did you cry?" Dominic gave a half laugh, wiping at his cheek. "Maybe a little." Ryan turned to Nora. "You too?" She nodded, smiling through tears. "Definitely." Ryan beamed. "Then I did it right." Later that evening, after the noise had faded and the city's glow pulsed outside the windows, Dominic gathered Nora and Ryan in the living room. The house was quiet, except for the soft clink of glasses, sparkling cider poured by Dominic himself. "To you," he said, lifting his glass toward Ryan, "for every step that got us here." Ryan clinked his cup, grinning. "And to Miss Nora," he added, "for showing me where to put my feet." Dominic smiled. "Actually," he said, turning to Nora, "I have something for her." Nora blinked, confused. "For me?" He walked to the desk, opened a folder, and pulled out a document. The heading read, "The Nora King Foundation for Pediatric Movement and Play Therapy." She froze. Dominic spoke quietly, like he was afraid to break the moment. "I want to build something," he said, "in your name. A foundation. Real programs, real funding for kids like Ryan. For families who can't afford specialists or insurance battles or years of waiting lists. You'll run it, lead it, train others to do what you do." Nora stared at the paper, her mouth open, but no words forming. "I can't," she started, shaking her head. "Dominic, this is too much." "It's not enough," he said firmly. "You've changed lives without even trying to. Imagine what you could do if the world finally gave you the tools." Her eyes filled again. She looked from the folder to Ryan, who was watching her with quiet pride. "Miss Nora," he said softly, "now you can teach more kids to fly." That did it. Nora covered her face, shoulders shaking. Dominic stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her back. "This is yours," he said. "All of it. The credit, the name, the legacy. You earned every bit." She looked up at him, voice trembling. "I don't even know what to say." "Say yes," he replied. She took a long breath and nodded. "Yes." A week later, the press release went live. The photo showed Nora standing beside Dominic and Ryan, smiling, the foundation banner behind them. "A new era in pediatric healing," the headline read. The story spread faster than they expected. News outlets, medical journals, even talk shows. But none of that mattered to Nora. What mattered were the letters that started arriving at the house. Parents, teachers, kids, telling her how her story made them believe again. In the evenings, she and Ryan would read them together on the couch. He'd laugh at the drawings, stick figures standing tall, little hearts in the corners. Sometimes Dominic joined them, quiet, content just to watch. The woman he once thought was just the maid now had an office downtown, a team of young therapists she was training, and a growing movement spreading beyond Chicago. Yet when she came back to the Patterson house, she always took her shoes off at the door, walked barefoot through the yard, and checked the puddles after it rained. Because that's where it all began. One night, as the three of them sat on the patio under the soft hum of the garden lights, Ryan leaned his head against Nora's arm. "Miss Nora," he murmured. "Yeah, baby." "When people ask who you are now, what do you say?" She thought for a moment, then smiled. "I say, I'm a believer in puddles." Ryan laughed. "That's weird." "It's true," she said. "Every great thing starts with a small step and a little bit of mess." Dominic looked at them both, a quiet gratitude in his eyes. The boy who once couldn't stand, the woman who once wasn't seen, and the man who'd finally learned what it meant to stay. Together, they sat under the night sky, 3 stories rewritten by the same miracle. And somewhere deep inside that stillness, Dominic realized the truth of it all. Sometimes faith doesn't shout, it whispers and walks. 2 years later, the building stood tall on a quiet corner in South Side Chicago. Bright white walls, wide glass doors, a mural stretching across one side painted by local kids, feet, legs, wheels, wings. In bold blue letters above the entrance, it read, "The Nora King Institute for Movement, Play Possibility." Inside, the halls buzzed with life. Children's laughter, parents' voices, the quiet rhythm of hope in motion. But outside on this bright fall morning, the crowd had gathered for something more. The grand opening of the second therapy center, a community space, funded entirely by the Patterson family, built where Nora had once walked her little brother across cracked sidewalks between makeshift therapy drills. Now she stood between the 2 people who had changed her life as much as she'd changed theirs, Dominic and Ryan. Ryan was 9 now, taller, stronger, more himself. He wore a navy blazer, no crutches. His walk was confident, still deliberate but full of ease. A press badge hung from his neck. Junior ambassador. He beamed at the reporters, shook hands with donors, and answered questions about therapy with the clarity of someone who had lived every moment of it. "Miss Nora says play is a kind of medicine," he explained to a local TV crew. "And medicine works better when you laugh." Nora stood back, arms crossed, watching him with pride that barely fit in her chest. Dominic, beside her, had grown softer around the edges. He still ran his company, though less often from the corner office, and more from a phone tucked into his back pocket, while walking the garden or helping with after-school homework. He looked at Nora now, that familiar warmth in his voice. "You ready for this?" She smiled. "Been ready for years. Just had to believe it was possible." He nodded. "And now you're building it from scratch." "No," she said gently. "We built it." The ribbon fluttered in the breeze, yellow and bright. The crowd quieted as Ryan stepped to the front, a pair of small scissors in one hand, his parents, because that's what they were now in every way that mattered, on either side of him. He looked up at the audience, then at Nora. "I used to think my legs were broken," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Turns out all I needed was someone who saw me standing." Gasps and applause filled the air. Nora's hand trembled as Ryan reached for hers. "Ready," he whispered. She nodded, tears in her eyes. He turned to Dominic, who bent low to meet his eyes. "Cut it, champ." With one clean motion, Ryan snipped the ribbon. Flashbulbs burst. The crowd erupted. And just like that, the doors opened. Not just to a building, but to something much bigger. The ceremony spilled into the afternoon. Inside, children explored the new therapy rooms, walls painted with colors that spark movement, not fear. There were balance swings, obstacle paths, sensory gardens, art stations, music corners, no whitecoats, no judgment, just joy. Nora gave a brief tour to a group of visiting physicians, explaining the core of her model. "Play, permission, and presence," she said. "Every session starts with what the child chooses. We listen to the body. We celebrate every wobble." "And what about data?" a skeptical doctor asked. She smiled. "We keep it, but we also keep their drawings." Ryan joined them mid-tour, proudly showing off his favorite spot, a wall of handprints. Every child who had completed a full therapy journey here added theirs in bright paint. "Mine's gold," he said, "because Miss Nora said I'm the first kid to come full circle." The doctor looked up. "And how are you now?" Ryan grinned. "I run. I help. I teach other kids how not to fall." Nora rested a hand on his shoulder. "He reminds us why we do what we do." As the sun began to set, the crowd thinned, and the 3 of them found themselves back outside, standing beneath the mural, watching the light shift across it. Dominic exhaled. "Feels like the ending of something." Nora shook her head. No. This is a beginning. Ryan looked up at both of them. Can we stay a little longer? Of course, Dominic said. This is yours too. You think she even knows what we're saying? Cole didn't whisper. He smirked as he said it, swirling his wine like the silence across from him was proof of victory. What he didn't realize, the quietest person in the room wasn't the one he needed to fear. Because just a few steps away, holding a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc with steady hands and eyes like sharpened glass, Nancy Davies was listening. And she understood everything. The restaurant was called Veritas, private, gilded, cold, a place where deals were whispered over Wagyu, and billion-dollar empires changed hands between bites. It sat at the top of a luxury Manhattan hotel like a crown, glass walls, velvet booths, and a table so long it needed its own zip code. Tonight that table seated men with global reach and wallets to match, but it was supposed to be her night. Yoshiko Shinohara, Japanese tech mogul, founder of Kaito Robotics, 45 years old, quiet, composed, a woman who built her empire without raising her voice and had no plans to start now. She sat at the head of the table like a stone in still water, no translator, no pleasantries, just presence, and that made the men across from her itch. Cole Harmon, CEO of Calix Global, was already losing patience. Next to him, Troy Beck, his silver-toothed second-in-command, was 3 drinks deep and twice as smug. They'd arrived expecting submission, smiles, signatures. What they got was silence, unapologetic, regal, sharp as steel. They mistook it for weakness. They mistook her for a formality to get through before the ink dried. They were wrong. And slipping between them all, barely seen, entirely overlooked, was Nancy Davies, 27, black, working a double shift in polished shoes and a burgundy apron that didn't belong in a room like this. She poured their wine, cleared their plates, dodged their stares. But what none of them realized, not Cole, not Troy, not even the maitre d' who forgot her name, was that Nancy had grown up in Sapporo. That Japanese wasn't just a language to her. It was muscle memory. It was the voice of her childhood, her identity, her mother's world. It was sacred. And tonight, that language, the one no one expected her to know, was going to become a blade. Because when Yoshiko whispered, soft and broken, "Is there no one here who sees me?" Nancy didn't hesitate. She didn't translate. Not yet. She heard her. She understood her. And somewhere inside, something cracked. A silence she had worn like armor for years began to peel away. But before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. I hope this story reminds you. Sometimes power doesn't speak first, but it always speaks last, because before Nancy Davies ever opened her mouth, she had already changed everything. They called it a partnership dinner, but everyone in the room knew what that really meant. Control, wrapped in courtesy, dressed in custom suits, served with a side of A5 Wagyu and $900 wine. Cole Harmon leaned back in his chair like he owned the building, one hand wrapped around his glass, the other gesturing lazily toward Yoshiko Shinohara. "She even understand a damn word we're saying?" He chuckled, not with humor, with certainty. Troy laughed louder. "Doesn't matter. A $2.3 billion buyout for some silent robotics queen? I'll take it. Let her nod all she wants." Nancy Davies tightened her grip on the wine bottle. Neither man looked at her. They never did. She was just the waitress, a blur in their periphery. But as she stepped back from the table, she caught Yoshiko's eyes. Still, steady, unblinking. And behind that silence smiled something deeper. A quiet that wasn't passive. It was watchful. The Veritas room held its breath in velvet and crystal, 12 seats around a table that cost more than Nancy's annual rent. Cole sat at one end, radiating ego. Yoshiko at the other, radiating nothing. It rattled him. He wanted warmth, gratitude, deference. Instead he got elegance and stillness, the kind of stillness that made powerful men twitch. Nancy poured Troy's wine next. He didn't glance up. Chop chop, sweetheart. Don't make me die of thirst. The table laughed. Nancy didn't. She tilted the bottle. Smooth, controlled. Her hands were steady, her face neutral. But inside, rage was threading its way up her spine, not just at what they said, but at how freely they said it. Like nothing in the room could push back. Like no one in the room could even understand. Yoshiko's translator sat 2 seats down, expression unreadable. He offered polite summaries, 1 sentence at a time, just enough to keep the illusion of civility intact. But Nancy was reading more than words. She was reading the room, the glances, the half-laughed slurs, the way Cole leaned forward and slowed his voice like he was speaking to a child. You need to understand, Ms. Shinohara, this deal isn't just generous, it's a golden parachute. And let's be real, Troy added, without our infrastructure, Kaito's tech will never scale. Nancy nearly dropped the tray in her hand, not because of what they said, but because of what they didn't. They weren't making a deal. They were staging a takeover, and assuming she didn't get it. She stepped back into the corner of the room, half-shadowed, half-lit, invisible again, but not deaf, not dumb, not passive. She'd been taught to listen more than speak, raised in Japan, where silence had meaning, where listening was an act of honor, where respect lived in the folds of language. And now, in this glass castle of arrogance, that language rose again, quiet, wounded, resolute. Yoshiko shifted slightly, tilted her head toward her plate, whispered something in Japanese. It was soft, subtle, almost lost in the hum of clinking cutlery, but Nancy heard it. Koko ni sai wa mite kureru hito ha inai no ka? Is there no one here who sees me? Nancy's throat tightened. She stood still, wine bottle in hand, heart pounding, mouth dry. She looked at Yoshiko, and for the first time that night, Yoshiko looked back. No one else noticed. Not Cole, grinning into his bourbon, not Troy, checking his watch, not the manager in the back, glaring at Nancy to keep moving. But something had shifted, a current. A signal passed between 2 women who had never spoken, but already understood each other completely. Nancy didn't know what she'd do next. All she knew was this: she couldn't stay quiet much longer. And when she finally opened her mouth, the entire room would hear her. Nancy Davies knew how to disappear, not vanish, not fade, just slip quietly into the backdrop. It was something she'd been practicing since childhood. In classrooms where no one sat next to her, in boutiques where the staff followed her but never greeted her, in job interviews where they loved her resume and hired someone else. You learned after a while to be smaller, not just in voice but in presence, eyes down, smile soft, movements efficient. Don't be the problem, don't be too proud, don't be seen. At Veritas, that was the entire training manual. Flawless service, no opinions, seamless silence. And Nancy had mastered it. But tonight, something was unraveling. She hovered just inside the kitchen doors, back pressed to the steel, wine tray resting against her hip. The sounds of the restaurant blurred behind her. She wasn't thinking about tips. She wasn't thinking about clocking out. She was thinking about that voice. Yoshiko's voice. Soft, fragile. Asking a question that didn't belong to the room, but still somehow reached her like it was meant for her. Is there no one here who sees me? Nancy had heard those words before. Not in sound, but in feeling. Sapporo, Japan. She was 8. Cold fingers clutching a thermos of miso soup at recess, her pink scarf tangled around her chin. The other kids hadn't questioned her skin. They didn't ask why her mother looked different or why her Japanese was flawless. They just accepted her. She belonged. Her mother, diplomatic, brilliant, endlessly exhausted, had been stationed there for 9 years. Nancy had learned honorifics before sarcasm. She bowed before she questioned. She absorbed the rhythm of language like it was breath. Japanese wasn't just a skill, it was home. Coming back to the States had been different. Suddenly her fluency wasn't impressive, it was unexpected. Her experience wasn't international, it was interesting. And somehow she was always explaining herself. Too black to be a cultural expert, too fluent to be just a waitress, too smart to be overlooked, and still always overlooked. Now, standing at the edge of that dining room, watching men in suits deconstruct a woman they didn't understand, Nancy felt something rising. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was recognition. Because Yoshiko wasn't being ignored by accident. She was being erased on purpose. Nancy returned to the room, slowly, carefully, mask back on. Cole was mid-rant about market shares and intellectual property. Troy was pretending to care. Yoshiko was silent again. But this time, Nancy understood what that silence cost. She collected an empty plate. Her fingers brushed against a document left open on the table. Fine print, legalese, predatory terms wrapped in polished language. She didn't read the whole thing, but she saw enough. And now her silence wasn't just strategic, it was loaded. She moved to Yoshiko's side, clearing a dish with practiced ease. Yoshiko didn't look at her, didn't need to. Their eyes had already met once. That was enough. Back in the kitchen, Nancy's manager barked orders about pacing, wine pairings, dessert delays. She nodded on instinct, didn't say a word. But her heart was beating harder now. Her breath came tighter. Her hands trembled just slightly. Something inside her had shifted, the way it had years ago during a school play in Kyoto when a teacher told her, "Your voice doesn't belong in this role." Not because she couldn't pronounce the lines, but because she wasn't meant to stand center stage. Tonight felt like that again, only this time she wasn't 8, and this time she wasn't leaving the stage. Back in the dining room, the laughter had faded. The power had settled, cocky and lopsided. Nancy stepped forward, silent, polished, composed, still unseen, but not for long, because behind her quiet hands and waitress uniform, Nancy Davies was no longer just watching. She was deciding. And when the moment came, she'd be ready. The steak knives gleamed under the candlelight. Not a speck on the plates, not a crease in the linen, not a single voice raised. But the room was getting colder, not in temperature, in tone. The kind of cold that came dressed as formality, that moved through legal language and careful smiles, pretending not to bite. Cole leaned forward, elbows on the table, tapping a pen against a thick contract in front of him. "We'll handle the stateside rollout. You keep your name on the tech. Win-win." He smiled like he was doing her a favor. Across from him, Yoshiko remained silent. She picked up her glass, sipped, set it back down. That was it. Cole's smile thinned. Troy slid a second folder across the table. "There's an updated clause," he said casually, "just to clarify post-acquisition usage." Nancy watched from behind. She wasn't pouring wine now. She wasn't clearing plates. She was still, eyes locked on the document sitting just inches from Yoshiko's untouched dessert. Her manager would have snapped if he saw her pause like this, but he wasn't watching. No one was except Yoshiko. And Yoshiko's fingers hadn't moved. Nancy inched closer, her tray clutched against her chest. She didn't read every word, but she recognized the structure. A decade-long non-compete. An IP transfer clause so broad it might as well have said, "Everything she's ever invented now belongs to us." Buried in elegant font and phrases like efficiency, consolidation, and equity realignment. Predatory, dressed in politeness. Nancy had seen it before, not here, but in embassy meetings, in policy briefings she'd overheard as a child, in contracts whispered through diplomacy and disguised as generosity. This wasn't a merger, it was a silencing. Troy clinked his glass to Cole's. "We're practically teammates now." Cole laughed. Yoshiko didn't react, but Nancy saw it. A flicker, a subtle tightening at the corner of her mouth. The restraint of someone who knew exactly what was happening and exactly how little respect was being offered. Nancy took a step back, breathed, focused. Her instincts told her to stay quiet. Her training told her not to interfere, but her spine had gone rigid. She could feel it in her legs, in her chest, in her fingertips. That moment, where silence becomes unbearable, where watching starts to feel like complicity. Troy looked at Yoshiko and chuckled. "I mean, if there's anything confusing in the paperwork, I'm sure your translator can—" "Clarify?" Cole finished, flashing teeth. "We kept it simple, don't worry." Yoshiko blinked once, slowly. Nancy felt heat rising behind her eyes. It wasn't just arrogance, it was intent. They weren't miscommunicating. They were counting on miscommunication. Nancy stepped forward, just slightly. She wasn't sure what she was doing. She just needed to move. The translator sat still, hands folded. He hadn't touched the updated file. Yoshiko's hand hovered over it and then pulled away. Not out of confusion, out of clarity. Nancy knew that kind of pause. It was the pause before surrender. The moment you weighed dignity against consequence, the room hummed with false civility. A cage, polished, padded, perfectly lit. But still a cage. And Nancy Davies, the girl who wasn't supposed to exist in this space, was standing at its edge, pulse pounding, breath shallow, every muscle screaming to speak. Not yet, but close. So close. Because this wasn't just about a contract anymore. It was about power. Who gets to speak? Who gets to be heard? And who gets to decide what silence means? The wine was beginning to run low. Nancy felt it before she saw it. Troy's eyes flicking toward the bottle, then toward her, like she wasn't a person, but a button that hadn't been pushed yet. She was already moving before he made a sound. Almost. Snap. Fingers. Sharp. Quick. Dismissive. Hey, sweetheart. More of that Sauvignon. Chop chop. The words hit like a slap wearing silk gloves. She froze for a fraction of a second. Not long enough for anyone to notice, but inside, something cracked. Nancy walked to the table, her hands steady, her steps silent. She didn't look at him, didn't smile. She poured the wine slowly, measured. Troy didn't thank her. He never did. Cole kept talking, breezing through numbers like this deal was already closed. We've mapped out Phase 1, US rollout by Q4, EU by next summer. Assuming regulatory clearance, of course. He laughed at his own line. Yoshiko said nothing. Nancy refilled the glass. Still quiet, still invisible. But inside, her heartbeat was crawling up her throat. Troy leaned back in his chair, loose and smug. He cut his eyes toward Yoshiko and spoke louder now. Still no comment. You sure we didn't buy a statue? A couple of the other execs chuckled under their breath. Nancy's grip tightened around the neck of the bottle, not enough to break it, but almost. She turned to leave, and then she saw it. A new document slid halfway across the table. Different color tab, different font, smaller print. She caught a phrase. Transfer of proprietary algorithms upon signature. Her stomach dropped. She didn't need to read the rest. They weren't buying Kaito Robotics. They were trying to own Yoshiko, erase her code, her voice, her future, with a pen and a smile. Nancy stepped back into the shadows, the wine bottle cold in her hand. Her manager was watching now. She could feel it. The side glance from across the room, the invisible leash pulling her back into line. But it was too late. Something had changed. Inside her, the dam was starting to buckle. And then Yoshiko spoke, barely above a whisper, in Japanese. Jenshu wo hanaseru hito ha koko ni inai no ka? Is there no one here who speaks truth? Nancy's breath caught. She turned, not dramatically, not loudly, just turned, toward her. Yoshiko was staring directly at her now, not past her, not through her, at her. Nancy stepped forward, a single movement, deliberate, controlled. She set the bottle down on the white linen tablecloth, both hands. Then slowly, and she bowed. Not the kind of nod people give when they're sorry to interrupt. The kind of bow that came from memory, from reverence, from something deeper than apology. It was the bow of someone raised in a culture of respect, and done being disrespected. Every fork froze, every glass paused mid-air, every man at that table went still. Troy blinked. Cole tilted his head like he'd missed something, and Nancy lifted her head, eyes forward, voice steady. For the first time all night, she spoke. Shinohara-sama. May I translate? The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was electric, like the room itself had been rewired. Yoshiko's eyes didn't widen. She didn't smile. She simply nodded. Once. Slowly. And just like that. The room flipped. Nancy Davies was no longer invisible. She was no longer just the waitress. She was a weapon, and her voice had just been unsheathed. Nobody moved. The wine stopped mid-pour. The knives hung in the air like questions, and Nancy's voice, calm, clear, unexpected, cut through the hush like silk slicing paper. "Shinohara-sama, may I translate?" Yoshiko's eyes never left hers. A single nod. Quiet, measured. That nod shattered the room. Troy's mouth parted like he was about to speak, but no sound came out. Cole leaned forward slowly, like the table was suddenly unstable beneath him. "You speak Japanese?" he asked. Not curious, accusing, like her fluency was theft. Nancy didn't answer him. She turned back to Yoshiko, bowed once more, then stood tall. "With your permission, I'd like to interpret your response to their proposal." Yoshiko folded her hands. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. "Hi," she said. "Please." Nancy faced the table. 12 seats, 12 men who had spent the last hour laughing, negotiating, mocking, assuming. Her voice didn't tremble. "Ms. Shinohara would like to clarify that she has read every clause in the contract and that she understands fully." She paused. Eyes met hers, narrowed, blinking, shifting. She let the silence sit for a moment. She also requests the removal of the non-compete clause, the IP transfer provision, and the relocation restriction disguised under Section 14.3. The room cracked, right down the center. Cole reached for his bourbon but missed the glass. Troy leaned forward. Wait, what are you even—" "You buried it in subclauses," Nancy said, still even. "Language designed to be missed, unless someone knew what to look for." Her hands were steady at her sides. She found it. A low cough came from the translator, who hadn't moved since Nancy stepped in. Yoshiko gave him a single glance. He lowered his head. Troy recovered first. "This is highly inappropriate," he barked. "She's a waitress." Cole raised a hand. "Hold on." He looked at Nancy like she had just crawled out from under the rug with a secret he'd left behind. "Where did you learn Japanese?" "Sapporo," Nancy answered. "I lived there for 10 years. Another silence, this one heavier, more uncertain. "And I'm not just a waitress," she added. "Not tonight." The table seemed smaller now, the chandeliers dimmer. Nancy glanced down at the open document, so neat, so curated, and then back at the men who wrote it. "This contract doesn't reflect a partnership," she said. "It reflects a trap." Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. "And Ms. Shinohara deserves the truth. Not a translation filtered through diplomacy, but the truth." She turned back to Yoshiko. A softer bow. A private moment in a public war. "Shinohara-sama," she said in Japanese. "Do I have your trust to continue?" "Yes," Yoshiko replied. "Please, say everything." Nancy turned, not to explain, to reveal. Clause 9.4 allows for indefinite usage of proprietary software, without credit, without compensation. Clause 11.2 restricts her from developing future technologies without your written approval, even if she walks away from this deal. Every face shifted. Some flushed, some paled. The power was slipping, they could feel it. And Nancy was still speaking. "You're not offering her a partnership, you're offering her silence, disguised as synergy, covered in compliments." She stepped back, hands at her sides, eyes unwavering. "She says no." The room collapsed into stunned quiet. Cole didn't move. Troy sat back in his chair like the ceiling had dropped 2 inches. Nancy waited, calm, composed. She had more to say. But not yet. Not until someone else broke the silence. And in the space between what had just happened and what came next, you could feel it. A reckoning had entered the room. Silence stretched across the room. But it wasn't empty, it was loaded, with tension, with confusion, with something dangerously close to panic. Troy shifted first, reaching for a napkin he didn't need. Cole's mouth opened slightly, like he was still deciding between outrage and damage control. Nancy didn't flinch. She didn't backpedal. She stepped closer to the table. There's more. No one told her to stop. No one could. Clause 12.1 grants indefinite license to all existing and future AI models under Kaito's umbrella, without attribution. Clause 15.7 restricts public commentary from Ms. Shinohara for up to 10 years on any topic related to the company or its technologies. She let that sink in. It's a gag order. And a theft, wrapped in flattery, hidden behind translation. Across the table, Yoshiko remained still, but something in her face had shifted. Her silence no longer looked cautious, it looked sharp, intentional, alive. Troy stood. This is a breach of protocol. She's not authorized to— No, Nancy interrupted. She's finally being heard. Her voice was still soft, but steel was threading through every word now. You didn't want a partner, you wanted a name, a face for your press release, and the second she signed, her voice disappeared. Nancy turned to Yoshiko again. The room watched, unblinking. Would you like me to continue, Shinohara-sama? Yoshiko looked toward her translator, then toward Nancy. Yes, she said. Please continue. Nancy reached forward and turned the page. One flip. That's all it took. At the top, in bold, retention of ownership rights, international clauses. Clause 18.3 transfers full control of Kaito's neural interface blueprints to Calyx, effective immediately upon signing. No option for reversal, no clause for retraction. She looked at Cole. You knew she wouldn't agree to that. That's why you counted on the silence. That's why you counted on her needing you. Cole stood now too, his voice tighter than before. I don't know what you think you're doing. I think I'm saying what no one else in this room had the courage to. Nancy's eyes didn't leave his. I think I'm translating exactly what she's too polite to say herself. Behind her, a quiet click. A small device slid onto the table, black, round, unassuming. Yoshiko reached forward and pressed play. A voice echoed through the room. Cole's. She won't read it, just nods and signs. Sushi doll doesn't even blink. Then Troy's laugh. Let's just get her to ink it and celebrate. By the time she figures it out, we'll own her code and her silence. Then static. Then nothing. No one moved. The chandeliers above them suddenly felt too bright, too exposed. Nancy watched as the men's faces turned colorless. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Everything was already loud enough. Yoshiko leaned forward for the first time all night, calm, collected, clear. She spoke in English. Now that we all understand each other, I'll be renegotiating. With her. She looked directly at Nancy. No one argued. They couldn't. And somewhere behind them, footsteps approached. Fast. Angry. Nancy's manager. Storming in with a voice already raised. And a consequence she didn't yet know was about to miss its mark. The room didn't breathe. The last words still hovered in the air like smoke. I'll be renegotiating. With her. Nancy didn't move, didn't speak. Her heartbeat filled her ears, but her body stayed still. It was done. The lie was exposed. The balance shattered. And then, the door slammed open. Nancy! Her manager's voice sliced through the silence, loud, angry, familiar. He stormed in red-faced, gripping a towel like a weapon and waving toward the table as if no one important was sitting there. What the hell do you think you're doing? Everyone turned, except Nancy. She didn't flinch, but her eyes dropped to the wine bottle she'd set down earlier. Still there, uncorked, undisturbed. A reminder of the role she'd just outgrown. I asked you a question, her manager snapped. Are you out of your mind? You don't speak in this room. You don't interrupt private business. She faced him now. Not defensive, not apologetic, just calm. He stepped closer. Too close. You're done. Turn in your apron. And get the hell out before you make it worse. The words hit hard, but they didn't land. Nancy had already left the version of herself that would have cowered. She just looked past him, to Yoshiko, to the woman who had hurt her. And that's when another voice entered the room, deeper, steady, measured. She's not leaving. Every head turned. From the shadows of a neighboring table, a man stood. Tall, dignified, charcoal grey suit, presence like gravity. Nancy blinked. She hadn't noticed him before. No one had. But now, he owned the space. In fact, he said, she just saved your entire negotiation. Cole's expression fell flat. Marcus? The man gave a slight nod. Marcus Bell, major investor, silent board member of Kaito Robotics, and apparently watching everything from the beginning. Marcus turned to Nancy. His tone softened, but never lost authority. Miss Davies, I've been listening, and I want to personally thank you for protecting the integrity of this company. He turned back to her manager, and I'm going to be very clear. If she walks out of this restaurant without respect, compensation, and protection, there will be consequences far beyond your payroll. The manager's jaw locked. She's a waitress. She's a translator, Marcus said, a cultural strategist, and after tonight, something more. Troy sat frozen. Cole looked like he'd swallowed glass. Yoshiko hadn't moved since she spoke. She didn't need to. The room had already turned in her direction. And Nancy? She was still standing in the same spot. But the ground beneath her had changed. She was no longer on the defensive, no longer shrinking. She wasn't asking for permission. She wasn't waiting for approval. She was being seen. Her manager backed away without another word. Nancy looked down at the apron tied around her waist. She untied it, folded it once, and laid it gently on the service station beside her, not because she was finished, but because she was ready. And when she looked back up, every eye was on her, not out of curiosity, not surprise, but recognition. Nancy stood in silence. No tray, no apron, no orders to follow. Just her breath, steady in her chest, and the weight of 12 stunned men staring back at her like she'd rewritten gravity. Across the room, Troy reached for his bourbon with a trembling hand. He missed the glass. Cole had stopped blinking entirely, and her manager, gone, disappeared through the service doors without a word. Marcus Bell stepped closer, still calm, still composed. Miss Davies, he said, you've done more in 10 minutes than this team managed in 2 months. Nancy said nothing. She wasn't used to being praised out loud, especially not in rooms like this. But something in Marcus's tone made it land differently, not performative, not patronizing, genuine. You didn't just translate words, he said. You protected intent. You preserved dignity. You saw what no one else bothered to. Then he turned to Yoshiko. Miss Shinohara, your move. Yoshiko stood, for the first time all night. She didn't adjust her sleeves. She didn't clear her throat. She simply stepped forward, graceful, grounded, until she was standing beside Nancy. Then, with every man still watching, she reached out and gently took Nancy's hand. You saw me, she said, when no one else would. A pause. Then softly, would you allow me to return the favor? Nancy blinked. The room disappeared. Just her and Yoshiko now. The woman she'd once only served from a distance, now standing beside her, like an equal. Yoshiko turned to Marcus. Extend her a formal offer. He nodded. With pleasure. Then to Nancy. How would you feel about joining Kaito Robotics as an executive liaison and cultural strategist? A silence. But this time it was warm, alive. Relocation included, Marcus added. Tuition assistance, housing, 6-figure salary. Nancy's lips parted. She tried to speak, but nothing came. Not at first, because for so long her voice had been buried under everyone else's, but now it returned, shaky, small, but hers. I'd be honored. No one clapped, no one dared. The same men who had laughed at her, snapped their fingers, ignored her presence, now watched her walk out of the service corner and she didn't raise her chin, didn't gloat, didn't boast. She simply moved, with quiet certainty, with the dignity she had always carried, now finally reflected back. Yoshiko walked beside her, not ahead, not behind, beside her, and in that polished glass dining room where contracts were once written to erase, a new chapter had just been signed, one without ink, one with intention. And every man at that table could do nothing but watch. The dining room felt different now, not quieter, stiller, like the air itself understood something had shifted. Nancy stood in the middle of it. No tray, no apron, no more pretending. Just her, and the silence she now owned. Yoshiko hadn't let go of her hand. She didn't need to. The gesture wasn't for optics, it wasn't theater, it was truth. For the first time in hours, Nancy wasn't moving plates or reading documents. She wasn't interpreting contracts or translating power plays. She was simply standing still, and still the room revolved around her. Marcus Bell cleared his throat gently. "We'll send a formal letter," he said, "but the position is yours if you want it." Nancy looked at him, then at Yoshiko, whose face held no pressure, only clarity, only calm. "Executive liaison," Marcus continued. "Full relocation. Flexible start date. We'll cover the remainder of your graduate program, wherever you choose to attend." He paused. "Salary starts at 180. For a moment, Nancy didn't speak. Not because she didn't want to, because she didn't trust her voice not to shake. She looked at her hands, still open at her sides, no longer clenching anything. Then she looked at the table, at the men who hadn't said a word since she spoke. Cole's face was blank. Troy's jaw was set tight. They didn't speak now because they couldn't, because they knew. This wasn't just an offer. It was a reckoning. Nancy inhaled slowly, then met Yoshiko's gaze. "Shinohara-sama," she said softly. "Your voice deserves to be heard, and so does mine." She turned back to Marcus, finally steady. "Yes," she said. "I accept." Yoshiko gave the smallest of nods, not ceremonial, not scripted, a gesture of deep, mutual respect. Nancy bowed, not as a server, not as a translator, as a woman, as a force. They began to walk toward the exit, together, step by step, shoulder to shoulder. Each footfall sounded louder than it should have, or maybe that was just the silence they left behind, the same silence that once erased her, now parted for her. At the door, Nancy paused, not to look back, but to breathe, to feel it. The weight that had been on her shoulders for years, gone. She didn't need to be loud. She didn't need to make a scene. She'd already done the one thing no one expected. She stood her ground and changed the ending. The elevator opened. She stepped inside. Yoshiko followed. And as the doors slid shut behind them, the dining room stood frozen. No applause, no recognition, just the echo of something irreversible. The story of a woman they tried to erase, walking out beside one they never truly saw, and rewriting the future with every step. Sometimes the ones you overlook are the ones rewriting the ending.